Fernandez will be doing a Dharma talk. He's a substance abuse counselor locally and a Dharma teacher in training. And Dennis Duermeier will be answering questions. He's the abbot of the Providence Zen Center and Jiva Apostle. Thank you.
Wow. Jeez. Who did the promotion today? Gee whiz. It's a lot of people here. All right. Like George said, I'm also George. I jokingly call myself young George.
Not a joke.
And I thought today, my grandmother recently died. She was 85 years old, and it definitely opened up some things in my mind, and I thought I would talk a little bit about death, and we'll see, where it goes. So when it happened, or a couple days after it happened, her and I, by the way, were not super close. She was an interesting person, interesting personality, but when somebody dies, it's still significant. So anyway, I had reached out to Ken Kessel in our school, who I'd been in touch with a couple times because I wanted to know. I had received emails, if some of you may get them as well, where they request Jijang Bolsal chanting, or Ponsiyon Bolsal chanting for someone who's sick, someone who's suffering, or someone who died. So I wanted to send an email, get one of those emails sent so people would chant for her. And so he wrote back, and I'm not going to read you to death, okay? But he wrote back, and he put together, I don't know if he wrote this or if he got this, maybe somebody else knows where this is from, but he wrote something that, again, struck something, and I want to use it as a springboard. So he said, something had roots in something that had roots in something that had roots that are no more. What we see is rooted in what we don't see, closer always than we can know. It sounds a little bit like a Taoist, things rooted in what we can't see. Fun fact, Zen is kind of the birth child of the Indian Buddhism that when it arrived in China there was Confucianism at that time and Taoism, and it's said that Zen came out of the acculturation of the Indian Buddhism merging kind of with Taoism. So you will hear or you'll read some things, especially in Zen Master Sun Sang's book. He refers a lot to the Tao Te Ching, and some of the koans in the school are on the Tao Te Ching, and so it's kind of interesting. I like the historical stuff too about our school and about Buddhism in general. So anyway, I digress. The point is that this little few lines he sent, things we can see rooted in things that we can't see. I started thinking, my eyes obviously aren't that good if there's things that I can't see, that I can't perceive. And one of the things that I read years ago that really struck me, and I've shared it here before in other Dharma talks, and it really blows me away, is that our eyes actually only see about 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum. So light frequencies, we only see about 0.0035% of it. And take our hearing. I have a dog at home that can hear more than I can hear. So I once heard, a long time ago, I heard a Buddhist give a talk, and he said that, we normally, and this is true for me, I don't know if it's true for you, I usually think of my senses, my eyes, my ears, things that allow me to see, allow me to hear, allow me to touch, allow me to smell. But he pointed out that actually these things are more like blinders, that they actually blind us more than they allow us to see. And that kind of struck me. I was like, wow, that's very interesting. I never looked at it that way before. And it's funny how even as much as we can't see, hear, smell, taste, touch, my brain is still able to make so much out of that little bit, right? It makes so much, so many stories, so many, histories, so many, explanations, so many concepts out of tiny little bits of information. And I thought to myself, why, how does that happen? Why does that happen? I used to teach this class, and we used to talk a lot about habits of thinking, and the way that I would use this example, this metaphor for it is kind of like the first time you're driving somewhere. Like, let's say you have a job interview and you're in a new city, maybe you're not familiar with the area, and you get directions. You might drive to the place ahead of time, and you while you're driving there, you're paying attention to the street signs. You're kind of paying attention to landmarks. You're watching the time. All your attention is on the drive, right? But then if you get that job and you drive there for 5 years, right, you can do that same drive and not even, you could get to a place. You've had this experience, I'm sure. You don't even remember the drive, right? You're on the phone. You're thinking about other things. You're in the past. So it's almost like the brain once it learns, it hands off the activity, and then it just becomes repetitive. This repetitive pattern. And I think, again, speaking for myself, I kind of tend to live most of my life that way. Things just get handed off to habits and patterns, and all starting from this sensory information. My brain makes these patterns, and why does it do that? Well, it ensures survival, right? If things are predictable, then I don't feel as scared. I can predict what's going to happen next. But a consequence of that is that my world kind of shrinks, and everything kind of starts to look the same. And I suffer for that. I don't know if you've ever heard of Maslow. He's one of these guys that did a lot in mental health and behavioral health. And one of my favorite sayings of his is that when all you have to work with is a hammer, then all your problems look like nails. So that really applies. It's like the way that I think, the way that I conceptualize everything, turns everything into something that I already know. And one of the things you'll hear a lot around here said repeatedly is this idea of don't know. So we live in this world. We have these bodies, and we have this survival instinct, and all this stuff, this repetitiveness, this taking of this sensory information and forming these rules for living and predicting what's going to happen next, and kind of putting everything into a nice box that I can predict. It has a function. It ensures survival. It ensures my biological passing on genes to the next generation. There's that whole thing, and all that you can call that, and also part of that is cultural stuff that we inherit, religion that teaches us how we perceive things. So all these things, you could kind of lump them all together, and you use that word karma, right? It's like all the stuff that we carry on, and we perceive everything through our karma. We react through our karma. But really, it's like, what is karma? Well, it's like entanglements of cause and effect, that have become charged and emotional and heavy, and we kind of, again, not you, me, I carry it. And that's kind of how it is. And I think part of that process is, and I like computers. This is eventually going to connect to my grandmother, by the way. I'm getting there. But I think we often run like well, not so much anymore, but we used to have all these antivirus programs, right? And I think as you accumulate all this karma and all these lessons and all these things that we again, I'm carrying, you start to kind of like have these viruses in your thinking, in my thinking, where I start to misperceive things, and I don't really experience the world as it really is. I experience it through my concepts, through my beliefs, through my karma. And for me, this practice has been a lot about, that antivirus, questioning everything, questioning all assumptions, You'll hear in this place a lot the question, what am I? Even this body, even our perception of time is a side effect of this limited sensory information and these patterns of thinking. Like I went a few years ago to the Grand Canyon, and it was mind blowing. And I don't know what made me think of this while I was there, but I remember thinking to myself, if I was a large enough being, right, where I could see every nook and cranny of the Grand Canyon at once, right? How long would that take? It'd take like a split second, right? See it all at the same time, like see every single nook and cranny of the Grand Canyon at once. But I'm very, very small, right? So if I go in there and I try to look at every nook and cranny of the Grand Canyon, it'd probably take me years, right? So time only appears because that's the way my brain stitches together all of those nooks and crannies. It has to kind of organize it because my perspective is so small. But the truth is that it's all now. The whole thing exists now. So I have this idea. That's what cracked me up, those movies about time travel. It's like time is not real. It doesn't exist. It's a side effect of my brain organizing stuff. So really every moment is the totality of this universe. It really, really is. That's why we always, when we're doing our Kwan practice and you hear that hit, it's like that's the totality of everything right in that moment. Even this body, as I was saying a second ago, this concept of I, we have this skin suit, right? The skin barrier. This is me, that's you, and the room, and these objects that I see around me. It all seems so real, but the truth is, it's really just like a big vat or soup of molecules, and it's my thinking that separates it into things, right? And in my eyes and my ears, and it makes it all of these separate things. But again, that's a concept. The reality is, it's just a pool of molecules. That's the real truth. So I say all that because I had my father died also when I was 16 years old, and my grandmother died. I'm sure you've had this experience as well. It reminds you of previous deaths, and I had much more of an emotional reaction when my father died. I think about the person, the body that died. Yes, that is a fact. That body, from this kind of conceptual reality, the body died. But what he really was, what she really is, it's really just the molecules live in me, right? They're everywhere in the room. They live in my son. Not to mention the influence of these people, the memories in my mind of these people. All that stuff is that really who they are, or was it the body? Is that really who they are? And I like how in this, when I come here, it's about asking these questioning my perception all the time. Questioning my perception, questioning my assumptions. And it's funny too, because now it's bled into like my regular life, like when I'm at work or if I'm somewhere and I start feeling anxious, start feeling tense, I start feeling uncomfortable. One of the first questions that appears in my mind is, what is this? Like what is this? What's happening? What am I experiencing? And that's been very helpful, for me. Now the temptation here, and I kind of recognize this a little bit, in myself, is that it's very easy when you start saying these kinds of things to then think, well, then what does anything matter, right? Who cares if she died? Who cares if my father died? It's all just pool chemicals and molecules, and we shouldn't grieve, we shouldn't suffer. And that's a big bunch of bullshit too, right? Because if you read Zen Master Song Sang's book, Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, he introduces this concept of the Zen circle, which, wow, that really was very impactful for me. And he divides the circle into kind of like pies, so 0 to 90 degrees is kind of like the way, I guess, before practice, but like everybody just lives in the conceptual world and doesn't really, just lives through their karma. It's like a basic kind of perceiving. And then when you get up to 180 is you realize the emptiness of everything, which is kind of what I've been talking about. But it's very easy, he says in the book, to get stuck there, and he calls it the Zen sickness, where you kind of, you come to this point where you're like, well, if everything's empty, then nothing really matters, nothing's really more important than anything else, is who cares about anything, right? And then you go on to 270, and it's the magic thinking and the freedom mind. And to me, like a lot of people ask, I've heard in here, a lot of people ask questions about that, like examples of that. And for me, and I hope I don't offend anybody in here, but to me, that's like all this law of attraction stuff, that's 270. That's like, I can manipulate the universe by thinking different or believing different, or, and that's not to say that you can't do that. You like, it's just certain people who practice that for long enough, and they do some amazing things. But the point is, and I think what the Zen Circle teaches, is that even if you get all of those things, you can't escape suffering. They're not going to last forever. That's eventually you'll lose that. I'm going to lose this body. My son, my son is 13 years old, and what a lesson. I mean, many lessons, but what a lesson in like challenging this idea of emptiness it's been to have him. Because when I think about him suffering, or I think about him dying, oh my God, the level of emotional reaction that I get, and I know that I'm very attached, and I'm attached to my own body, right? I'm attached to this body. I'm scared of getting sick, getting old, dying, right? I'd be lying if I said, oh yeah, I'm beyond all that. And I believe that it's very easy to begin to look at this practice as a form of escapism, like just check out, from the world, and everything's empty, bliss. And that's not it. That's what the Zen Circle talks about. You get to 270, and then you get to 360. And 360, which is kind of funny, he goes, well, you go right back to where you started. Everything appears exactly the same. But now the truth knows kind of how to function in each and every moment. So going back to the Grand Canyon thing, it's like you could discount every nook and cranny and just say, well, it's not really that important because this is not really the whole thing. But in that moment, that nook and cranny is still the whole thing. It's part of the whole thing. So every tiny little bit that we're experiencing is just as important as the vast emptiness. And that's what I think my limited understanding of the Zen Circle teaches, is that every moment is the whole universe. Every moment is the whole universe. And then, of course, the most important part is because all that sounds really nice, maybe to you, maybe not, but it's all theoretical. It's all like conceptual. It's all words. It's all bullshit. The truth is how does that function in that moment to do the best possible thing, right? And that's really that 360. That point of 360 is how, and that's why you hear it a lot here, how can I help? How can I help? And if everything is really one, then the only natural reaction to any suffering is compassion, because that's you suffering, right? So I say that because when my father died and my grandmother died, I could either look at it and say, well, it's just the body, she's still alive, the molecules are still alive, her influence is still alive, there is no real death. And those things from a certain point of view are true. But I'm still human, I still have this karma, I still have emotions, I still have feelings, and I need to honor that and not use all that knowledge to justify saying that it doesn't matter. So I hope that all that made a little bit of sense. I want to share one more thing. Again, it's very short. And this was a, I don't know, maybe some of you have heard this before. It's a poem by Mary Elizabeth Fry about grief and death. And she wrote, and this just really, I love this. It says, it's called Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep. And it says, do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die.
Thank you, George. That was a wonderful talk and quite wide-ranging. I like both those poems very much. You know, we have this, just like this is Buddha poem that we use as a teaching tool. The first two lines of that are, the spirit remains clear and bright. The 6 roots and 6 dusts are taken off and thrown away. So the 6 roots are our senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And the dusts, as you say, are all the sensory phenomena that we experience in this life and use to navigate our way through it. But what could that mean? What could that mean if they're thrown off, taken off and thrown away? Then what? I like Ken's poem very much. And just yesterday I was reading an article, you know, so his idea was, well, it's rooted in roots that are rooted in roots that are rooted in roots that are rooted in things we can't experience. There's an article about archaeology in Guatemala about the Maya, and they've been using LIDAR, ground radar, to explore the Mayan Empire. And they have found out that everything that's been discovered about them at this time is just a tiny, tiny fraction of what is buried in the past, literally buried underground. And they showed some of the LIDAR images. And one of the archaeologists was saying, you know, we've been walking over this ground for generations and have absolutely no idea what's underneath there. And that was the first thing I thought of, you know, when you read that poem. You know, it goes back and back and back. But the other thing that really struck me was, and it struck me often, is the implications of the fact that this moment, as you say, this is the only moment that exists. And you know, one of the implications of that is that your grandmother lived in this moment. Your father lived in this moment. Everyone, all of us that lost, lived in this moment. You know, we have this, as you said, this conception of time because things keep changing in space and presumably time. You know, my hand is on the table, now my hand is up here. That's obviously different, and there seems to be some sort of sequential nature of that. And yet, this teaching always points to putting all that down and perceiving this moment and living in this moment. So, that's inconceivable, and that's kind of the point. Well, that is the point. What we're pointing at or aiming at is not a concept. Generally, we deal with concepts in either or. You know, we cannot really conceive. We literally can't conceive intellectually of the nature of reality. So this practice points at that over and over and over again. And becomes very frustrating to us because we're so used to, as you say, using all of these roots, manipulating all of these dusts in order to, well, basically ensure our survival and try to gain some sort of satisfaction from it. But it never works because that is not the essential thing. So we're always in this sort of low-grade panic about ourselves, about people we love, about people we care about. and suffer. So what do we do about that? How do we approach that? And one reason I've kept this practice up for so many years is because I haven't found anything else that just points so directly at that, as uncomfortable, as unnerving, as frustrating as it is. There's just no other way that I've found that as effectively puts our situation right in front of us and says, yeah, this is it. What is it? What is it? What is it? So thank you. Really enjoyed your talk. I like both those poems very much. And so does anyone have any questions? Any kind of question?
I have a question.
Here, Robbie, I need you to do the mic, otherwise you can't hear you.
Thank you. I always wonder, when I meet someone or listening to a Dharma talk, when your practice started and how it started and what got you into it.
You asking me? Me or okay. Let me think. Okay, so yeah, I first got introduced to Buddhism when I met my wife in 2006. Although it's a completely different kind of Buddhism then. And then we both discovered Zen together in 2007. And we started going to a Japanese school in Miami, there for about 3-4 years. And then we moved to Broward in 2010. And we tried for a while driving down there, but it was I went on Google and I found this place. And I started coming here in 2010. And then there was a few years that I wasn't coming as often. There's probably like a year or two here that I didn't come at all. But then a few years ago, I decided to really, focus, and so that's kind of how it happened.
Question for Dennis?
Sure.
Yeah. I don't need to give you this, or you can do that.
Thank you, George. That was wonderful. You really hit a lot of topics. And what leaped out to me was something from the Heart Sutra, which I really like. And the Heart Sutra, for those who don't know, is when Buddha was talking to Shariputra, one of his disciples, and giving him instruction. And one of the passages in there kind of like repeats what you said, and I always got a kick out the meaning of it, although I don't completely comprehend it. So I'm going to ask. Here's the passage. No eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no color, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, no realm of eyes, and so forth, until no realm of mind consciousness, no ignorance, and also no extinction of it, and so forth, until no age, no old age, and death, and also no extinction of them, no suffering, no origination, no stopping, no path, no cognition, also no attainment, with nothing to attain. Very powerful, very powerful. And I think he's pointing to something. Maybe you could explain a little better than I could. What is he pointing to?
What is this? It's pointing exactly to that. Sariputra was, one of Buddha's main disciples, and also was a very intellectual style teacher. So I think it's not unusual or not surprising, I guess, that the Buddha taught Dharma to him in that way. But it's pointing to something non-conceptual. George made reference to the fact that we think maybe sometimes practice is going to lead to some sort of escape or some sort of end of the unsatisfactoriness of our life in some sense. And I think a lot of times people come to Buddhism because they're suffering intensely sometimes. But what it's pointing to, what jumps out at me in those lines is no ignorance and also no extinction of it, no old age and death and also no extinction of them. So there's another line in our teaching that says it and dust interpenetrate. It and dust interpenetrate. I think this is probably as far as we can go conceptually to try and visualize, understand, think of what this is pointing at. Words can only take us so far. But what it's saying is that the essential nature of reality, emptiness, void, enlightenment, samsara, all of these things interpenetrate at this moment. And in our experience, the way we're built in our lives, we make that distinction, and we only seem to be able to generally perceive the old age and death, the life and death, the six senses and the dusts that obscure things, just because of the way we're built. I really believe that spontaneously we all touch that sort of interpenetration a lot in our lives, but that we don't have any sort of framework. We don't have a worldview that somehow allows us to believe it or trust it or let it function naturally. So we have this phrase that if we are living in our heads, if we're living by means of our concepts, of our ideas, our opinions, our forms and conditions, which most of us are most of the time, we say, why are you still dragging around this corpse? Why are you dragging this corpse through life? It's like this huge burden that we all are carrying, in some sense, needlessly. But as George also said, this Zen circle sort of takes us through all these possible realms. You can think of them as psychological states, you can think of them as actual experience. I mean, there's a lot of ways to think about it. But again, this is just a schematic for something that is not a concept. But in our practice, it always comes back to the point where we began, and maybe living in that moment, that point, this now, actually living our lives, rather than being blinded by our senses, our concepts, our ideas, and our opinions that arise from that. So the Heart Sutra is retracing the 12 links of dependent origination that the Buddha laid out, which is fairly complicated explanation of how we actually come into existence in this world and what sets it off and why this suffering, old age, sickness, and death, why they occur to us as human beings. So it traces it back to the root cause and says, cut that off, and then everything else falls away also. So there's some hope there, but I think sometimes the hope is that, as George said, I'll just be in bliss, I'll just be in emptiness, I'll just be able to live my life without all the anxiety and all the worry and all the so on and so forth that we generally experience. I don't believe that's true, but on the other hand, I don't believe that these, I've said this before, the sort of death grip that we have on all these things can continue to function that way. Because things, it's always coming and going, coming and going, coming and going in our lives. And sometimes happy, sometimes joy, sometimes grief. We don't deny that we're human beings. And I think oftentimes the way we talk about things leads us to think there's something, there's something that is going to allow us to live without the experiences that we have as human beings. So our teaching says correct situation, correct relationship, correct function. So yeah, George's father died, and the correct, in that situation, love your father dies, well, then you have grief. It's just as simple as that. So Zen doesn't mean that goes away. It doesn't mean that disappears. It doesn't mean that, you're just impervious to what's going on in the world. It means take that experience, whatever it is at any given moment, and use it to help all sentient beings. That's a huge job. How do you do that? So first, the idea is make your direction clear. This is not for me. Then take your not for me idea, digest that. That's what practice is all about. Then maybe this becomes more than an idea. Then maybe this becomes your life. Then maybe your suffering, whatever it is not so important anymore. And maybe the suffering of the rest of the beings that inhabit this universe, this moment with us, becomes so difficult to talk about. It helps, I guess, is the bottom line. That's the great Bodhisattva way. And realizing that is what the Heart Sutra is pointing at. And somehow realizing that it's right now, it's right here, it's us, it's this moment. How do you live that? So, any other questions? Yes?
I've been around Buddhism for a while, and I'm still confused, so,
Good.
I agree, it's all right, keeps me going. I seem to swing from everything-ism to nihilism. I'm either living like a monk or like a reprobate. What's the center walk for that? How do I find, because it seems when I address my materialistic living, I go to the other extreme and I find myself sequestered in my home, living like a monk for months on end. Trying to find the middle way. Maybe you gotta have a suggestion.
So, where do monk and reprobate come from?
Space.
Space? I'm not sure I understand that.
Space is information.
Yeah, well, our thinking.
Yes.
So sometimes you have this idea, oh, I'm living as a monk, I'm adhering to this, that, or the other rule or condition, or however you perceive it. And sometimes, oh, I'm just a wastrel, I'm just a reprobate, I'm just out there, drinking and smoking and having a good time and ignoring all this, what I know is my better nature and so on and so forth. So that's our lives. That's our opinion. The third Zen ancestor wrote a famous poem. Everybody knows the first two lines, at least, in which it says, the great way is not difficult, only do not make distinctions. But that's us. So sometimes you have this idea, I'm living this monk life, this holy life, this sort of disciplined, clean living, so on and so forth. Other times, the idea is no, I'm far away from that. I'm far away from my ideals or whatever. I'm just completely satisfying my sensual desires, and that's no good, possibly, or maybe that is good. I don't know. I don't know how you think about it. But all of that comes from this thinking about who we are. And so if you're a wastrel, if you're a reprobate, if you're out there, how can you do that for the sake of all sentient beings? And there's a lot of famous stories about these crazy Zen masters are out in the mountains or in the cities that completely, nuts, or maybe living in the gutter, or maybe visiting the whorehouses, or maybe all these stories. How would they do that? In our tradition, Kwan, who's the great-great-great-grand teacher of Zen Master Sung San, lived this sort of hippie life, for lack of a better term. He was famously undisciplined in that sense. And actually, he, in part time in his life, oftentimes people would come to him and ask for a Dharma talk, and he would say, okay, you bring me some soju, some liquor, and I'll give you a Dharma talk. And people would do it, and he'd get drunk and he'd give a Dharma talk. And then, people were always saying, well, why, you're a monk, why do you need this to give me a Dharma talk? And he says, well, I want to communicate with you. You're drunk, you're drunk on these illusions that you're living, and the only way I can really get through to you is if I'm that's a level.
That's a good one.
So he's getting drunk, but his impulse, his direction is pretty clear. It's to help these people in a way that they're going to be able to hear it. And it also made a big question in their mind. Oh, he's a monk. How come he's drinking liquor? Well, anything is useful. Anything can be used, any sort of existence that you have at the moment, can be for the benefit of all sentient beings. So if we have this idea that I'm being good because I'm being a monk, or I'm being bad because I'm being a reprobate, that's still all about us, you know, somehow about us. And if we can sort of, again, this is very difficult to talk about, but if we're not attached to those categories, then, yeah, maybe sometimes you have a good run of sitting and practicing at the Zen Center and doing all that good stuff, and then maybe other times you're just out there satisfying yourself. But if your direction is clear, then that's not a problem. Just help this world. We're really hard on ourselves. And if we continue to think in those categories, then we have still always some idea there's something out there that's I don't have, but I've got to get. Somehow going to solve this this problem I'm living. You always have it. It's your birthright. One reprobate, doesn't matter. It's yours. And how do you use it? Or that's not even the right way to phrase it. Maybe how does it function for the benefit of all beings? That's the point. So, well, I can stop there. Are there any other questions?
So yeah, I always have a hard time when we're saying for the what, like how we make it better for everyone when I don't know what's best for somebody else. I don't even know what's best for me. So sometimes I just feel like, and maybe as a teacher, when you think about young children, finding that rhythm through life, help them maybe make sense of their experience. But I feel like this is something that I have a very hard time. I'm new at this, right? It seems it's connection to the experience, but what is right or wrong, I'm never gonna be able to know. I can think what is right, but do I know for sure, especially when I'm an educator, I question that myself many times. Okay, I'm trying to do the best for my students. The reality is I don't know the future, so I don't know if what I'm doing is going to be the best or not. So I kind of do it with the best of intentions, but at the same time, it's at the time of, you know, the moment of all those roots that come through us. I'm Hispanics and all my roots are different than my students who are American roots, and you know, now they have this digital world, which is another dimension that brings to our experience. So to me, it's a big mystery that we live every moment, because otherwise I cannot make sense of it, and I don't know what's right from wrong.
Well, it is a big mystery. I mean, that's the essence of it. It is a big mystery. So most mysteries, we like mystery novels because there's a solution. We like mystery novels because at the end everything gets wrapped up neatly, and whatever I don't know, the perpetrator is caught, or the secret is revealed, or so on and so forth. And we want that. When George was talking about the Zen circle, I was there's a line in the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky, who is it? Ivan, the cynical intellectual brother, is telling the tale of the Grand Inquisitor, which he thinks explains all of human life. But anyway, the point of that is that he says people say